Hello everyone, welcome to the internet, and my name is... Today we're going to look at the differences between Chinese and Chinese. Well, what I mean is, we'll be looking at two of the many Chinese languages, Mandarin and Cantonese. As I mentioned in my video on Chinese, Chinese is not a single language, but rather a number of dialect groups that are united by a common writing system. The spoken languages are different and generally mutually unintelligible, which is definitely the case with Mandarin and Cantonese, which are both Sinitic languages, or Chinese languages, spoken in China. Mandarin is spoken by 960 million native speakers, mainly in the north of China, but is now used all over mainland China and Taiwan as the official language of government, media, and education, and it's one of the 4 official languages of Singapore as well. Cantonese, on the other hand, is spoken by 50 to 60 million native speakers in Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, and some adjacent areas, as well as in Chinese diaspora communities around the world. It's part of the wider Yue branch of Chinese. Before we get into the main differences between the two languages, it's important to point out that these days, speakers of either language typically write in Standard Chinese, or
普通话,
which is based on the Beijing dialect of Mandarin. But when Cantonese speakers read Standard Chinese, they say each word using Cantonese pronunciation, which creates the misconception that Cantonese is exactly the same as Mandarin except for the pronunciation, but that's not the case. Spoken Cantonese is also somewhat different in terms of grammar and vocabulary. And there's also written vernacular Cantonese, which reflects the spoken language and is used in some informal contexts. The differences we talk about in this video will be based on spoken Cantonese and its written equivalent, written vernacular Cantonese. By far, the largest difference between Mandarin and Cantonese lies in pronunciation. Both of these languages are tonal languages, but they each have a different number of tones. Mandarin has 4 tones, plus 1 neutral tone. There's a high flat tone, a rising tone, a falling rising tone, a falling tone, and the neutral tone. For example,
包薄饱报.
The neutral tone is a short de-emphasized syllable which is said with no regard to tone. Cantonese has 6 basic tones. There's a high flat tone, a mid-rising tone, a mid-flat tone, a low falling tone, a low rising tone, and a low flat tone.
C, 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 C.
Some people count 3 additional tones for a total of 9. These are historical tones that were used for syllables ending in p, t, or k. In Standard Cantonese, they've merged with other tones, so that the only remainder of these tones is the stop consonant at the end of the syllable. So if we compare the two sets of tones, you'll see that Mandarin has a tone that falls then rises, which is something that Cantonese doesn't have. You'll also notice that Mandarin has a narrower range of tones. Cantonese has a wider range of tones, with tones essentially in 2 ranges, the mid to high range and the low range. This makes Cantonese harder for English speakers to learn than Mandarin, because instead of distinguishing only the movement of a tone, they also have to distinguish whether a tone is in the mid to high range or the low range. In both Mandarin and Cantonese, and all Chinese languages for that matter, each Chinese character, or
汉字
represents one morpheme, either a word or a meaningful part of a word, which can't be further divided. But each character is pronounced differently in Mandarin and Cantonese. One example of this is the word for I. In Mandarin, it's pronounced
我
with the 3rd tone, or falling rising tone, while in Cantonese it's pronounced
我
with the 5th tone, or low rising tone. So the tone is different, but also notice that the initial consonant sound is different as well. Another example is this word, which means China. In Mandarin, it's pronounced
中国
with a high flat tone and a rising tone. And in Cantonese, it's pronounced
中国
with a high flat tone and a mid-flat tone.
中国中国
The pronunciation of these 2 words might sound pretty close, but the tones are partially different. And remember that the meaning of words is partly determined by tones. Notice that the 2nd character is pronounced with a k sound at the end in Cantonese, while in Mandarin it ends in a vowel sound. In Mandarin, every syllable ends in a vowel or in a nasal sound. In Cantonese, however, syllables can end in the stop consonants p, t, and k as well. Pronunciation differences between Mandarin and Cantonese are often consistent. This character that we just looked at is pronounced
中
in Mandarin, and so is this character, and this one, among many others. In Cantonese, they're all pronounced
中
The difference here lies mainly in the initial consonant sound. The systems of romanization are different for Mandarin and Cantonese, so the Roman characters might be a little misleading here. But the initial consonant in Mandarin is something like the English J sound, but with your tongue curled back. The initial consonant in Cantonese is ts, like ts in English. Think of the end of the word cats. Let's look at 3 more characters, first in Mandarin.
见见间
And in Cantonese.
見見見
In this case, we can see that the consonants and vowels consistently correspond, but that a different tone in Mandarin corresponds to a different tone in Cantonese. But the sounds don't always correspond like this. There are also characters that have the same pronunciation in one language, but different pronunciations in the other. In Mandarin, there's
谢写写
but in Cantonese, they're pronounced.
謝係寫
Here we can see that the Mandarin sounds don't consistently correspond with Cantonese sounds. In Mandarin, they're pronounced the same, except for the tones, but the 3 words are pronounced in 3 completely different ways in Cantonese. Differences in grammar. Both languages are fundamentally SVO. For example, here's a sentence meaning I read those books. First, in Mandarin.
我看了那些書
Next, in Cantonese.
我睇咗嗰啲書
Word for word, both sentences translate as I read those book. So you can see that both are SVO, subject, verb, object. Even though the words are different, in both languages the verb consists of 2 parts. The verb itself, followed by the perfective marker, which shows completion. And in both languages the object includes 2 parts, a determiner followed by the noun. A determiner is a word like an article or a demonstrative adjective which tells us information about which noun we're talking about. One difference can be noted in sentences that have a direct object. In basic sentences in Mandarin, the indirect object comes before the direct object, while in Cantonese it comes after. For example, here's a sentence in each language meaning, give me a pen. In Mandarin, we would say,
給我一支筆
and in Cantonese it's,
俾一支筆我
Notice that these are imperative sentences, commands or instructions. Word for word, the Mandarin sentence translates as, give me a pen. The Cantonese sentence translates as, give a pen me, with the indirect object in the sentence final position, after the direct object. Notice that the word meaning I and the phrase meaning a pen are reversed. Let's take a look at the phrase meaning a pen for a second. It consists of 3 parts. First, the word meaning one, followed by a word that functions as a counter for long cylindrical objects, and then the word for pen. In other cases, the indirect object is in the same position as in Mandarin, before the direct object. Like in this sentence meaning, he sends me a book. In Mandarin it's,
他送我一本書
and in Cantonese,
佢送我一本書
Notice right here that in both sentences the indirect object comes after the verb and before the direct object. In both languages, the indirect object could go after the direct object, but another word functioning like a preposition meaning to would be necessary. Another difference is the way that comparisons are formed in Mandarin and Cantonese. Here's a sentence meaning I'm bigger than you. In Mandarin, you'd say
我比你大
while in Cantonese you'd say
我大過你
Word for word, the Mandarin sentence is I compare you big. Or you could think of it as I compared to you am big. The Cantonese sentence translates as I, big, more than you. So you can see that in the Mandarin sentence, the adjective comes at the end, while in the Cantonese sentence, it comes before the comparative word and the pronoun meaning you. Notice that the comparative word is different in the 2 languages. Differences in vocabulary. In Chinese languages, words are represented by ideographic characters called Hanzi. Sometimes, Mandarin and Cantonese use different words represented by different Chinese characters to represent the same concept. And in other cases, the same Chinese character might have a somewhat different meaning or usage in either language. The difference in vocabulary could be as high as 50%. That's when comparing Mandarin to spoken Cantonese and written vernacular Cantonese. Here are some examples of different vocabulary. These words function as copula verbs, like is in English.
是
Is used in Mandarin. When read in Cantonese, it's pronounced
是
but the typical Cantonese word is
係
This character is also used in Mandarin and is pronounced
是
but it's used with the basic meaning of relation or connection. These are negation words meaning no or not. In Mandarin, it's
不
Again, this word is also used in Cantonese and pronounced,
but
but it's used more often in standard writing than the colloquial Cantonese word. This word is not used in Mandarin. If we look at the word for teacher in both languages, we'll see that Mandarin uses the word
老师
while Cantonese uses the word.
先生
This word is also used in Cantonese with the pronunciation.
老師
This word is also used in Mandarin with the pronunciation
先生
and means Mr. or husband. Actually, in Cantonese, it has both of those meanings as well as the meaning of teacher. But from what I hear, this word, xin sang, is not used by younger people, who use lo si instead for the meaning of teacher. These are the words for bus. In Mandarin, it's
公共汽车
These four characters could be translated literally as something like public shared gas car. But normally, these two characters form the word meaning public, and these two form the word meaning car. In Cantonese, it's
巴士
a word derived from the English word bus. Two Chinese characters with sounds similar to those of the word bus were chosen to represent this English borrowing. This type of borrowing from English is more common in Cantonese, particularly in the Hong Kong variety, because it was a dependent territory of the UK. In Mandarin, to ask someone's name, you would say,
你叫什么名字
in Cantonese, you would say,
你叫乜嘢名
Here you can see that the word order is the same, so the sentences are translatable word for word. If we translate word for word, we get you call what name, but some of the words are different. The word for what is different, and the word for name or first name is different. In Mandarin, it's a two-character compound word, and in Cantonese, it's a single character. Of course, even the words that are the same are pronounced differently in either language. This word meaning you is pronounced in Mandarin as
你
with a falling rising tone. In Cantonese, it's
你
with a low rising tone. You may have noticed that the Cantonese audio recording sounded more like le with an initial L sound, rather than ne with an initial N sound. The N sound is considered proper Cantonese, while the L sound is considered casual or relaxed pronunciation. This word meaning call is pronounced in Mandarin as
叫
with a falling tone. In Cantonese, it's
叫
with a mid-flat tone. This word, or word component, meaning name, is pronounced in Mandarin as
名
with a rising tone. And in Cantonese, it's
名
with a mid-rising tone. Note that throughout this video, I've been using traditional Chinese characters for both Mandarin and Cantonese. But in mainland China, Singapore, and Malaysia, simplified Chinese characters are used for Mandarin, while traditional characters are used in Taiwan. As for Cantonese, in Hong Kong and Macau, traditional characters are used. In Guangzhou and surrounding areas, people normally use simplified characters for Cantonese. Some people think that Mandarin is always written in simplified characters and that Cantonese is always written in traditional characters, but it's not that simple. You may be asking yourself, which language is better to learn? Well, there are definite benefits to learning either one. If you learn Mandarin, you'll be understood all over mainland China as well as Taiwan, and also in Singapore and Malaysia, but they'll probably just speak English to you. And if you learn Cantonese, you'll be able to communicate with people in the southern part of mainland China, as well as Hong Kong and Macau, and you'll be able to enjoy all of those famous movies from Hong Kong. Either way, if you have a deep cultural interest in either of these languages, that will certainly make it easier to learn. The question of the day. For native speakers of either Mandarin or Cantonese, to what extent can you understand the other language when it's spoken? How about when it's written? And for learners of either language, have you taken a look at the other language? What similarities and differences did you notice? Be sure to follow Langfocus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'm not sure if you can follow those in China, but please try. And once again, I would like to say thank you to all of my wonderful Patreon supporters, especially these ones right here on the screen. They are my top tier Patreon supporters, so many thanks to them. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.